Gap. Noun. Gap. In. Between something. 1. A space between two things, or in the middle of something, especially because there is a part missing. A gap in a hedge. Leave a gap between your car and the next. There should be a 6-inch gap at the bottom. 2. A period of time when something stops, or between two events. A gap in the conversation. They met again after a gap of 20 years. There's a big age gap between them. A big difference in their ages. 3. A difference that separates people, or their opinions, situation, etc. The gap between rich and poor. The gap between theory and practice. See also creditability, gender gap, generation gap. 4. A space where something is missing. His death left an enormous gap in my life. There were several gaps in my education. We think we've identified a gap in the market, a business opportunity to make or sell something that is not yet available. Extra examples. A huge gap has opened up between expectations and what is deliverable. A rabbit darted through a gap in the fence. Ads are just there to fill the gaps between quiz shows. Despite the age gap, romance blossomed. He flashed his headlights and changed lanes whenever a gap opened up. He realized how narrow the gap was that separated him from his pagan ancestors. Her appointment will fill the gap created when the marketing manager left. His death left a huge gap in my life. I'm planning to travel in my gap year. Newspapers were talking of a credibility gap between what he said and what he did. Position the tiles, leaving a narrow gap between the edges. Seal the gaps around the windows with a sealant. She returned to teaching after a 12-year gap. The company has exploited a lucrative gap in the market. The gap between rich and poor widened. We think we've identified a gap in the market. A gap in his career. A job to fill the gap between high school and college. An attempt to bridge the gap between the academic world and industry. An awkward gap between the bed and the door. Legislation to close a gap in the law. Serious gaps in their knowledge. The gender gap in earnings. The knowledge gap between doctor and patient. The unbridgeable gap between the two cultures. Wondering how to fill an awkward gap in the conversation. Are you taking a gap year? I spotted a gap in the cars and went for it. I waited for a gap in the conversation. The gap between rich and poor gets wider every year. A movie that is sure to bridge the generation gap.